First, the violence. You know, yes, they are very violent and rough characters, but that's how the 17th century was. And this is the turn the novel happens, or the tennis match itself happens in 1599. So it's the transition between the 16th and the 17th century. And European reality was simply brutal in that time. It is most of the data contained in the book, and we can elaborate there, is true. You know, it is true that Francisco de Quevedo, before becoming an adult, had already killed a soldier betting money to the dice, and he was an assassin. And in the date of the tennis match, he was under house arrest. This was just recently discovered. You know, he belonged to a very noble family. His father and mother were always near the king. The father in administrative jobs, the mother more like in housekeeping jobs. But anyway, this was a kid that knew personally the king, you know, and that was not easy or common. Well, Caravaggio was the son of a mason. You know, he was always protected by the Juliana family, that you don't get to be more noble than that. No, you are a descendant of Julius Caesar. so he was always protected by that family, because his father seemed to be a very well-known mason. We don't know really. And since very early in his career, it was clear that he was one of a kind, and that he was doing something new. And I suppose that he was a very cute kid, because no, he was really well protected by the Roman nobility that had moved a century before to the Sforza castle in Milan. No? It is true too that there were no Milanese artists by then. You know, the Lombards were famous mainly as bankers, people who makes money, people who makes bread, people who makes San Pellegrino water, but not artists. No? So Caravaggio had this protective system, and that's why they both survived. Caravaggio, when he became a celebrity, he very young, he was like 22 or 23 when he became like the hottest artist in Rome. That was the New York City or the Berlin or the Mexico City of that time, the coolest city if you were going to be an artist. And when he was, I think, early 30s, now I don't remember because it's been a long time since I wrote the novel, but I think that he was in his early 30s. He killed another mobster. He was a very interesting character. He really was an interesting character. He fought for he was a foot soldier in a mob family in Rome, and Caravaggio fought in the mob family that defended the interests of France and the Medici family. You know? And his enemy and pimp of the prostitute that appears in in the more important paintings of Caravaggio as a divine figure or as a biblical figure. Her name, everything will return, I promise. Melandroni was her family name, I don't remember. Felicia Melandroni, Felicia Melandroni, maybe that was her name, I'm not completely sure. But you have seen her a zillion times. She's the Santa Catarina, the Saint Catherine that has the sword and is pointing to the sword in the painting. She is Judith in the ultra famous painting of Judith beheading Holofernes. She's in many paintings of Caravaggio, and she was not the most scandalous of all the models that he used when he was invited to paint finally a painting. I know that I'm leaving, but this is just fascinating. No? Yeah. And this story is not in the novel. When he was finally invited to do a painting for St. Peter's, you know, in Rome, that was the absolute consecration, he thought that it was a great idea to use as a model for Mary in the painting of Mary of Letrán that I don't remember in which museum it is. I think it's in Germany now. He thought that it was very cool to use the lover of the Pope as the model for Mary, who was another prostitute. So he did, and of course the painting never made it for obvious reasons to St. Peter. Well, sexualities were much more fluid in the 17th century than we think. No? Caravaggio was openly gay in general. You know, he was a bisexual character. There is, of course, reactionary critics that say, no, he was like a manly boy, but no, it's very clear that he was a man of fluid sexuality, and there was no problem. No? And he worked for cardinals that were like well-known gay people, and it didn't matter. No, it's the pre-Victorian era. It's people had fluid sexualities, and that was it. No? It was a world less conservative than we think, and more violent than we think. Anyway, so Caravaggio used it to be a foot soldier, really, of the French family in Rome, and his arch-enemy and pimp of his lover, model, and ultimate, like this new Caravaggio that appeared in Toulouse. Do you remember it a couple of years ago? It's another version of the Holofernes painting that is really bad, that he did when he was almost blind and syphilis and everything, so it's not that good. But anyway, he painted her again, which means that it was this woman, the more important woman in his life. And she ended up being a very rich woman. She ended up marrying a nobleman, leaving her business and marrying a nobleman. And one of the few things that she kept from her crazy youth was one portrait that Caravaggio had done of her when she was 16, and they were lovers. So it seems to be that there was a lifelong love story. Caravaggio died at 39, so it was not a very long story because he died of everything at 39. But anyway, I don't know. I am going to violence. What was the original question?
I don't remember what the original, but I do have another question.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, okay.
See, he was an assassin. I'm going there. So anyway, the leader of the other mob and pimp of this super famous model was his arch enemy, no? And they both could use swords. That was unusual in that Rome. If you could not go to Walmart to buy a gun, you could not have a sword in the city. But Caravaggio could, because he was in the service of a cardinal. And he had this sword that said on one side, nec spec, on one side, nec metu, and on the other side, nec spec, without fear, without hope. It's just beautiful. I want to tattoo that in my back, but I will not do it. I have 3 children, and they wouldn't let me. Anyway, so he had a sword, and the other one, Ramusio Tomasoni, was a soldier, so he had a sword. They played tennis one day, and something happened in the tennis match that Caravaggio killed Ramusio Tomasoni in a street, in a tennis pitch, because it was a pitch really, in the street that today is the Palacorda street in Roma. It's still there. In those times it was the end of Rome. Now it's just full of tourists. No? But anyway, Caravaggio had that. No, he was an ultra-violent character at the same time that he was an extraordinary artist. No, we are in a time in which we wonder about the relationship between art and the moral persona of the artist. I should not go there. That's super risky, more in a university. But I was thinking in the case of Woody Allen, for example, can we still enjoy Manhattan or Hannah and her sisters, considering the life of Woody Allen? When we think about that question, we should think about bringing down the paintings of Caravaggio, because whatever Woody Allen had done is children play compared with what Caravaggio used to do. No, he was truly a violent man and a crazy man and a very violent man. And Quevedo was a very curious character too. He was as I told, he was a kid from nobility. He had property. He lived on his rents, And he wrote, he was like a famous intellectual, a very famous intellectual, and he wrote these treatises and books of history that are like the worst books ever written, incredibly boring and stupid, about how great the empire was and how the king of Spain was everything. And at the same time, he was writing a revolutionary literary body of works that never appeared under his name. No, he would sell his erotic poems that I insist he was the master of sonnet, of the erotic sonnet particularly. He was a conceptist poet, like what in English is called a metaphysical poet, or what Eliot called a metaphysical poet, that kind of poet. He wrote amazing sonnets, and they would be sold like pieces of paper in the street, and people would just finish them. No? He wrote a novel named El Buscón that is one of the best picaresque pieces of his time, in which he just brutally criticizes life in Spain in his moment. This was published just after El Quijote. And more than anything, he wrote a book named The Dreams, the Book of Dreams. I don't know if there is an Hispanista here, that is just a perfect set of pieces of criticism of the empire. No? It's the 17th century, but it is these surreal dreams in which one of the dreams is, for example, Judgment Day. No? And it's just Quevedo falling asleep and seeing the line of people that will go to hell. No? And of course, everybody is there going to hell, beginning with the king, of course. No? But then everybody, the dentists, the doctors, the lawyers, the students, and with reason. No? It's a beautiful, incredibly profound political piece of criticism. And at the same time, he was like a servant of the empire. No? So he was a curious character. He was a pirate for a period, even when he was noble. There is this moment in which the Spanish Empire needs to insulate Venice, the Serenissima República of Venice, and is Quevedo who takes care of the military closing of Venice, of the exit of Venice to the Adriatic Sea. You know, he was a really, really interesting character. He was very defective. He was overweight. He used glasses. No, he was, I don't remember, but he walked like this. You know, and at the same time, he was really good with the sword. He was a very curious character. This was a very long, weird answer.
No, it's wonderful.